Okay, Objective 9.6. I'm actually going to do 9.6, 9.7, and 9.8 in this particular video, just because 9.6 is a very short video. So this would be navigating to various outdoor features using an aerial photograph. Welcome to a treasure hunt. That's really what this is meaning to do. Obviously, we're not going to get to do that in the nature of everything being all set up. So in here, the aerial photo navigation, what this means is that you really have to remember that if you're using a raw aerial photo, there's all this distortion that I just finished talking about. So if you are worried about relief displacement, like for example, you might see a point that is like behind a building, or it's like on top of a building, and you're like, you get into the building and go all the way up to the top and there's nothing there. You can't get onto the roof or whatever because it's actually behind the building. So all of that relief displacement, and it's like all that leaning out. There's also some distortion as well because aerial photos do not have a map projection. So if you're trying to find points that you identify on the aerial photo itself, you're going to find that that it's going to be very hard to um, it's going to be very hard to like find those points with like coordinates, for example, because you don't have coordinates in an aerial photo. If you have an ortho photo, you can assign coordinates, and then it makes it a little bit easier to navigate to those points, but the visual is going to have distortion. It's going to have be more accurate in the center of the aerial photo than out to the edges. So things also that you need to remember is how to recognize features, so things like roads and buildings and everything else. So how do you identify a road versus a waterway? What if it's a muddy waterway? How do you tell the difference between them so you're not showing up and suddenly falling in the water? Same with like what does a building look like versus, like shipping containers. How do you tell the difference between them? So familiarizing yourself with what that is on that aerial photo is really important. One way to help you identify between man-made and irregular features is that man-made has a pattern. It looks very regular, like the curves are like perfect, that kind of thing. Humans just need that regularness. They need everything to be very sorted and very ritualistic and very like controlled, where anything irregular is always natural. The natural features are doing all kinds of things. So when you do have to do navigation with an aerial photo, you do have to identify features, work with those features, understand which way is north, because sometimes what you feel is a natural north is not the natural north and you're going the wrong way. Also, an aerial photo is a downwards view rather than a sideways view. So being able to identify types of objects from the top that you can also sort of identify from the side. And that's where the relief displacement actually helps out. So that is aerial photo navigation. If maybe at some point we'll put together some fun thing and send you out and you can do like a little treasure hunt with an aerial photo. But that would be the plan with that. So moving into the second last objective in Module 9 is the concept of viewing in stereo. So our eyes are stereo, right? So we have two eyes that take in information from two different locations at two different slightly two different angles. So because of that, we are able to see in 3D. So what I often do in the class is I tell you to put your arms way out to the side as far as you can, just stretch right out like in a T, and then close one eye. And the eye that you close, so let's say I close my left eye, where I close my left eye, and then I'm going to move my left hand towards the inside, keeping it stretched out, but moving it towards the center of my body, and I stop where I see it with my right eye. And then I'm going to open my left eye, and I'm going to close my right eye, and I'm going to bring it to where I can just barely see it with my left eye. And then in front of me, I'm going to have my hands open up in a V shape. That V shape, what's inside of that is all of what is 3D. That is what we see in 3D. And when you're using your eyes, by the way, you have to look directly straight when you're looking. I don't want you looking to the side and you're like, oh look, I see in 3D for like my entire view, but that's because you just turned your eye. So you have to like keep your eyes dead straight in front of you and then pull them in. So really it's about 60% of our view that we actually see in 3D. The rest of it is also only in 2D because it was only with one eye. So in order to see in stereo, that is what we need. We need to have a distance between two camera locations. And then we have to have two planes that are at like slightly different locations. And then we have a point down at the bottom. So we're going to see this point in two different locations on our images that are two different angles. And then we're going to be able to view through that. So we end up getting a 3D view from this. And that's just like the visual of it. There's a lot of math that goes into this as well, but we won't be getting into that here. So to see in 3D, you need those two images at two different locations at different angles, and our eyes are a good example. In photogrammetry, we actually require 60% overlap to see that portion in 3D. So whether that be on a computer, on paper, whichever way you end up doing it, digital or analog, you need that 60% overlap. And overlap is defined as the area that is the same between two images. And this allows us to estimate 3D coordinates of an object. So you're going to get to do that in photogrammetry. Yay, photogrammetry, lots of fun. In this class, I'm just introducing the concept of it. So here we have what we would call a bundle adjustment. So what you would do is you have your images that you would have a flight line. So let's say my flight line is going this way down this image. So you can see that this aerial photo and this aerial photo have about 60% of the same. Same with this one versus this one. They're about 60% the same overlap. So those are called overlap. Then as my airplane flies through up here, turns around and goes back down, I'm going to have another flight line that's going the opposite direction. This flight line has to have what we call side lap with the other images. So there's going to be a 20%, there has to be a minimum of 20% side lap from the previous line. And if you have that 20%, then you're good to go. What we call putting it in tie points. And so as long as there's tie points that we can actually connect all the images together, then we will get a really good 3D view of the area. So a bundle adjustment allows you to do all the images at once, where if you're only doing two just to determine two images, you don't really need to apply a full bundle adjustment because you're not worried about that side lap. So drones are a really good example of having to do bundle adjustments a lot because drones do several passes and so they have to connect all those images together. So when you take it and put it into like Pix4D, which is the name of the software, it will take that drone imagery and create a 3D model for you using a bundle adjustment. So that's just, again, scratching the surface, just introducing the knowledge of what it is. We're not going to be doing it in this class because I'm not teaching you the software. You get to do that in photogrammetry. But when you show up in photogrammetry, Rick is going to be like, so when Karina talked about the bundle adjustment, what did she teach you? And you're like, oh, two things. Two things happen in bundle adjustments. I need 60% overlap and 20% side lap, and is taking all of the images and putting them together into a 3D model. And bang, he'll be happy. So moving into Objective 9.8, the very last objective of this module, and that is actually applying stereo viewing with two aerial images. Well, normally I would have you guys in class with stereoscopes actually looking at images and going around and identifying features. But because we're online, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we would use rather than, and how we would identify features rather than actually doing it. And I apologize that it's not going to be any more exciting than that. But all right, so stereoscopes. This thing is a stereoscope. So it has mirrors on either side here. It has a lens. You can either use these little goggles and look straight down, or you can use these ones. In SATE, like our old ones, you don't want to use these goggles because we're really not looking at it long enough to try to adjust them and make them focus better and keep your posture, everything perfect. So we just kind of leave those ones off. This bar is for looking at what we call parallax. I'm not worried about that. but if you ever have to use them, you'll be using this for parallax. I don't talk about parallax in this class. You'll discuss that in photogrammetry when you get to it in fourth semester. So we use stereoscopes for analog images. So obviously these are not digital. They don't look digital. They are, getting a stereoscope is significantly cheaper than getting photogrammetry software. To give you an idea, like you're probably looking at $20,000 to $30,000 to get photogrammetry software, where you can buy one of these for about $2,000 to $3,000. So you just put them underneath the stereoscope. You need two of them because you have two eyes. You need one for each eye. And then you push them apart as far as you can. You slowly bring them together, trying to line up the land features. As soon as those land features get lined up, it'll pop up and be in 3D. It's actually really quite incredible. But you have to make sure that you don't end up overlapping them, and you make sure that the 60% overlap is actually matching, not twisted or having any kind of rotation to it. So there's a bit of an art to it. It's kind of fun, kind of neat to use. These are still used in in archaeology, still used in geography. They're still used in like geomorphology. You will still see these in paleontology. You see these in all kinds of industries that don't tend to have a lot of money for fancy software. So, so you may come across these at some point in your career. So the last thing that comes with this is feature identification. So our eyes identify features based on size, on shape, on texture, on pattern, on color, and reflective properties. So when I'm talking about those 5 things, I want you to think, let's say you walk by somebody's desk. How can you tell something is a stapler? How can you tell something is a hole punch? How can you tell something is a monitor versus a laptop? How can you tell it's a mouse? How can you tell that it's a pen and not a pencil? Sometimes those are tough to determine between. How do you tell it's a lamp? What is it that identifies that to you without touching it? And you might say, well, I just know what it is. But it's like, what really, if you were blind, what is it that you would have to do to be able to figure out what it is? You'd have to touch it. Now, if you're not blind and you've never seen something before, how would you describe it? And think about that description. And that is how our eyes identify certain things, is through that description that comes through it. So sometimes it can be really tricky to pick things out, especially in black and white images. Features like rock and urban areas look very much the same. They have very much the same reflective properties. They tend to be very bright in black and white images, and especially near infrared black and white images. So they're very bright, and they really stand out. And because urban areas have lots of different changes that happen within it, so does rock. So how do you tell the difference? And often it comes down to patterns. So urban areas look a little bit more regular, where rock is really varied. And also like the urban areas, like you think about pavement, what is pavement made of? It's made of rock. What is asphalt shingles made out of? Made of rock, right? So keep that in mind with your feature identification. So even if you take the time to look at Google Earth, and try to look at it and think, how do I tell the difference between these things? And how do I identify, what if it's in 3D now? I put it into 3D. Can I tell the difference between a valley and a hill? What is it about a hill and a valley that I can identify? So just a few things to think about, a few things for like food for thought for you as we go finish up the semester here. So there is a really good online resource. Again, I think it's the same one that I gave last time on photogrammetry. Highly suggest, actually this one's a course. So if you really think photogrammetry is cool and you want to get into like flying drones and all of that, I suggest checking out this resource and seeing what they have to say about photogrammetry, because it's really, they've got some really good resources on there. And of course there's always my references as well. So you can check them out and see what they're all about too. So lots of good references on photogrammetry. It's been around for a very long time. Like as soon as they had airplanes, they had, well actually as soon as they figured out something could fly, they had photogrammetry. So, I mean, pigeons were carrying around cameras in like the early 1900s. They had cameras on kites in the 1800s. And then, once we had aircraft, well, that just changed the whole world because military reconnaissance pilots went from being, really like note takers to becoming photographers. So really big differences in and advances in what photogrammetry is, but it's been around for a very long time. And actually, I want to conclude on the touching on the idea of these 3D movies. So just for you to think about, when was the earliest 3D movie that you know of? Would you be surprised to know that the earliest 3D movie was in 1921? So 3D movies have been around for 100 years. The only difference is they figured out a way to advertise it and make it a big deal. And so it's the marketing team that's like taken this ancient technology that's like 100 years old to become something so super popular now. So something to think about. We're really like, this is all cutting edge stuff that was really started 100 years ago. So then I guess module 10 will be next, but you guys will have, you may have seen module 10 already because you needed it for your first midterm. But just keep in mind if this is the last of the lectures that you have to listen to because you don't want to review module 10 because it's been a long time, then I wish you luck on the final exam. And I always look forward to feedback. So thanks so much, and I hope you've enjoyed this course. I know it's a little bit different, a little bit off of what we would do normally in class, but we did our best, and I appreciate all your guys' effort.